Net-run operations control. Sounds like a good place to run a mega facility from.
We plug in your output there. See how she settles in.
I'd expect a very warm welcome down below if I were you.
Good. Before going out, it better be with fireworks.
Gonna be an ambush, no doubt. Just focus. You're better than them.
The highly anticipated 2.0 patch for Cyberpunk 2077 along with the forthcoming Phantom Liberty expansion is on the brink of release. As the developers add the finishing touches to the game, some have taken to social media to unveil new details, particularly regarding CPU support enhancements. Be reminded that the game is a richly detailed open-world game that is denser than most, thanks to the highly vertical nature of its setting in Night City. At any given time you're likely to have a half-dozen floors both above and below you, and those floors are very likely to be populated with interactables like clutter items, loot, and of course, NPCs. All of that simulation takes CPU time, and while modern CPUs have become insanely fast on a single core, there's just no way to handle that level of simulation on one core, especially on consoles. The game had some performance issues on consoles in the past, and while that's largely been resolved at this point, at least if you are fine with 30 FPS gameplay, it seems like CD Projekt Red has put some more effort into optimization with the new patch. We say that because the company's lead scene programmer Philip Piersinski just tweeted the above message, warning gamers to make sure their CPU cooling is up to par, as it will apparently load 8 core chips up to 90%. Philip Piersinski has revealed on X that the game's upcoming Phantom Liberty DLC will be extremely demanding on system hardware, particularly CPUs, with native support for 8-core processors. The CPU demands are so high that Piersinski warns gamers to check the condition of their CPU cooling system to suss out any potential problems. He recommends running an application like Cinebench to make sure the cooling is adequate for keeping the CPU temperatures in check under sustained loads. Piersinski says the new expansion will average 90% CPU utilization on an 8-core chip, which basically amounts to a CPU stress test. Cooling will also be pushed even harder, due to higher ambient temperatures generated by any graphics card that might be dumping heat into the case interior. It's absolutely a valid concern, as any workload that puts that much stress on a CPU is going to cause it to heat up, and a lot of consumers, most PC gamers, don't bother to ever check temperatures or cooling until a technician tells them to do so. It's completely believable that someone who played Cyberpunk 2077 before will load up the new optimized version and find that it actually runs worse because their CPU is now overheating. Notably, in a reply, Philip says that 8-core AMD CPUs will be natively supported by the game now, meaning that they will no longer need the SMT tweak to be enabled by a mod. While this is great news, and we're glad to see the change, we do have to wonder why it took nearly 3 years for this fix to make its way into the codebase. Philip also says that systems with 12 or more cores may not benefit from having SMT enabled, but given the history with SMT tweaks in the game, we might like to test that for ourselves. More significantly, the game will no longer require mods for Ryzen CPUs, addressing a persistent issue faced by gamers using Ryzen SMT hyper-threading technology. Furthermore, Piersinski suggests that gamers adhere to 8-core SMT configurations, but they will retain the flexibility to adjust settings to suit their preferences. Notably, these 8-core optimizations indicate that the game may deliver good performance on Ryzen 7000X 3D series processors, thanks to their 3D Vcache enhancements designed for 8-core clusters. Piersinski doesn't reveal why the new expansion pack is so CPU demanding. But if previous Cyberpunk 2077 updates are anything to go by, it's probably related to a combination of ray tracing combined with all the crowds and other non-playable characters. The last major graphics update that came to Cyberpunk 2077 was the game's RT Overdrive mode, which drastically improved the game's visual fidelity by replacing all rendering with path tracing. As you'd expect, RT Overdrive is substantially more demanding on system hardware, and requires high levels of upscaling 4 times plus potentially DLSS 3 frame generation to achieve 60 frames per second or more on RTX 40 series GPUs. Ray tracing is not only extremely intensive on the GPU, but also CPU intensive, which is easy to forget. Much of the initial setup work for the GPU ray tracing is currently done on the CPU, specifically the creation of the bounding volume hierarchy structure that helps to optimize the ray or triangle intersection calculations. The more complex a game world, in terms of geometry, the more CPU intensive the BDH generation can become. Still, we don't know for certain that ray tracing is the primary culprit for the upcoming high CPU demands. The only additional details the developer gave regarding CPU utilization is related to the symmetric multi-threading usage with the new expansion pack. Piersinski said SMT support will be natively supported, without any mods, confirming that the Phantom Liberty will ship with a patch fixing the game's notorious CPU thread utilization issues that are present with the current game, allowing the game to utilize more CPU threads more effectively. Phantom Liberty system requirements are already available and account for the increased CPU demands. For lower quality presets without ray tracing, an i7 6700 or Ryzen 5 1600 will supposedly suffice, but for RT overdrive an i9 12900 or Ryzen 9 7900X is recommended. Again, that suggests the 90% utilization of an 8-core CPU involves ray tracing of some form. CD Projekt Red's system requirements effectively suggest buying one of the best CPUs for gaming, like the Ryzen 9 7950, 7900, or Ryzen 7 7800. Alternatively, Intel's Core i9 or i7 should do nicely. In our previous Cyberpunk 2077 tests, we found that all 5 of these chips perform well in the game, offering virtually identical performance between each other. They also meet or exceed Phantom Liberty's 8-core sweet spot. If you just want to play the game, perhaps without ray tracing, older 4-core and 6-core CPUs should suffice. Your GPU of choice will also play a role, as mainstream parts like an RTX 3060 or RX 6700 XT aren't likely to need as potent of a CPU to keep them busy. As for cooling, a general advice is to try and keep peak CPU temperatures below 90 degrees Celsius, and preferably 80 degrees Celsius or less, though the most recent chips tend to spike as high as 95 degrees Celsius or more even with some of the best CPU coolers. Older generation chips like the i9 9900K or Ryzen 9 5900X as an example won't tend to run nearly as hot. Again, keep in mind that a game will inherently put more of a stress on your system, as it will also heat up your graphics card and not just the CPU. You could also run Furmark as a background task to keep your GPU busy, if you're looking for worst-case temperatures, but do keep an eye on temperatures if you do that, as it's definitely possible to push your system too hard with that combination. Currently, the release date for the Cyberpunk 2077 2.0 update remains uncertain. However, according to Marcin Molmot, a global community director of CD Projekt Red, the 2.0 patch will be released next week. Let us know in the comments if you're interested in seeing CPU performance scaling tests with Cyberpunk 2077, Phantom Liberty.